Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we're going to share Wendigo encounter stories. First story. There's a girl who lives alone in the woods. Down a long dirt road, past a mile or so of forest, there's a girl that lives all by herself in a big house. All of her relatives have passed, leaving her a treasure trove of valuables and money that she keeps on the property. There's not even a dog to keep her safe from people who would take those things away. And when the wrong ears hear all those things, their eyes fill with dollar signs, and they decide to make the trek. They always make the same wrong assumption, though, that I'm really alone. For men came to my house a few nights ago. I saw one of them carrying a crowbar, and another had a gun tucked into his pants. I only closed my curtains and locked my bedroom door. I've seen this happen many times, and I can tell you exactly what came to pass, even if I wasn't a witness to all of it. They enter through the front door. They're always surprised to see it's unlocked, but they likely assume it's because I live so far out and am comfortable in the safety of seclusion. They split up in pairs, not worried about what they'll do if they find the owner of the house. She's just a girl. One who stares at the ground when she talks and who trips over her words in a rush to get them out. She's clearly not very bright, and she's clearly not very strong. One of my monsters is hiding under the couch tonight. When he saw they were coming, he slipped under there. One of their ankles stray too close, and he's pulled under with not even a scream. In the morning, the man will wake up in a country where he doesn't speak the language and with no memory of how he got there. Only that there's a bite mark on his leg and that he'll never feel safe in the dark again. He's the lucky one. The monster under the bed is merciful. The monster in the closet is not. The one with him assumes that the missing man is pulling a prank. He calls his name and starts poking around for him. He asks the other two, who are going through my grandmother's music boxes, where their friend went. They have no clue. They didn't see it happen. The searcher opens a pantry, and out a clawed hand flies, wrapping around his throat and dragging him with. He screams and screams and screams until his throat is cut. In seconds, all the skin is flayed from his body, landing next to his body in a pile of fleshy ribbons. Eyeballs are squished like grapes. Teeth fall from his jaws and to the ground with a sound not unlike dropping a handful of marbles. He isn't long in the world, but those remaining seconds are filled with some of the most excruciating pain a person could remotely comprehend. When the other two throw open the door, they find the whole pantry is soaked top to bottom with blood. The remains of their friend are unrecognizable as such, other than the scraps of his clothing and his crowbar. The two panic. They split up in their haste to escape. One runs into the backyard. His mistake. The monster outside the window lives out there, and he doesn't really interfere with trespassers unless someone bothers him. And when someone slams the back door open while screaming at the top of their lungs, well, that bothers him, as it would most people, I think. I don't talk about the monster out there. Only that once his target was in sight, the unlucky soul didn't have the benefit of a quick death. He was dragged into the shed, and what happens in there I can't tell you. I just know that the man didn't expire until 3 nights later, and when that was happened, he was begging for death. The last one, in a blind panic, ran up the stairs to my room. He threw himself against the door once, twice, 3 times before it gave. I screamed and ran to my corner, my heart thumping in my ears. The man got up and stared at me. Fear turned to realization that I was the girl in the house, and not only that, I was somehow responsible for the mutilation of his friend. He took out his gun and pointed it at my face, calling me a slew of horrible names. He stops when he looks at my eyes. Once blue, now one's turned green. The pupil is constricted to a pinpoint. The other one looks washed out compared to how bright the other is. He can't stop staring in my eye. The gun nearly slips from his hand until I catch it, firmly pressing his hand to the grip. He's starting to shake, sweat dripping down the side of his face. I stare at him until he turns that gun on himself, putting it in his mouth before pulling the trigger. Blood paints the ceiling as the body thuds to the ground. I don't know what things people see when they look into my green eye, but I doubt it's anything good. I go to bed after this, knowing the monster under the bed will clean up after tonight's debacle. Not the closet monster. He's always been a real dick about that. The monster outside the window isn't allowed in the house. He tracks mud everywhere, and no one really likes his staring. It's good that he cleans, though, because I have to get back to work. I'm working on a book about thieves who think they can rob a girl who lives all alone, only to find out that she's not alone. And not only that, but that girl is the worst monster of them all, because she created the three monsters that live in under the bed, in the closet, and outside the bedroom window. Second story, creature on back road. If you read my first encounter, or whatever you want to call it, well, this all happened just about 7 kilometers down the road from that. A few years later, I was out hunting with a friend when we lost legal light. So we hiked back to the truck and hit the road in his parents' new Ford half-ton, the ones with the sensors all over the vehicle. We had some music playing as we were just heading back towards town again, when the music started acting weird and cutting in and out with static. So me being in the passenger seat, disconnected the Bluetooth and reconnected the phone. Music cleared up and we continued down the road. We got up to the KM board on the road that my previous encounter took place, and I mentioned, "Oh hey, that's the whistle block that we logged a couple years back." Half jokingly, because I couldn't make heads or tails of it. My friend replied, "Great, thanks for that," as I had told him the story before. We continued slowly driving down the road because it gets pretty rough in a couple spots, and the road has a few sharp turns and an S-bend. Well, we go about 1 kilometer further, and the music starts screeching and doing what we can only describe as alien noises. So I disconnect the Bluetooth again, and my friend says, "Oh, Mom's got a cord in here." So he stops and gets the cord for me. I plug the phone in and play music again. Another kilometer down the road, and the phone goes ape SHT. I mean loud alien squealing and sounds similar to that T2Y dial-up internet noise from the 90s. We had started into the S-bend when this was happening, and we shut the music off completely as we were driving still, making the one half of the S-turn, and then we both look up from the music deck/screen, and the headlight illuminate a figure standing in the middle of the road. So we swerve and take the ditch a bit, still going probably 30 kilometers per hour, and get the truck back up on the road. We continue coasting down the road as we are both in awe after just seeing a flash of this thing. I finally say, after what seemed like 5 quiet minutes, "Man, did you just see?" My friend cuts me off and says, "AF, can skeleton in the middle of the road?" I say, "Yeah, like a white rib cage and a deer skull for a face." He finishes. I said, "Turn around, what the CK was that? Does someone need our help?" Not thinking that we are in the middle of nowhere, with no vehicles around or any that we had passed from other hunters. It was early season, and no one bow hunts here anyways. My friend said, "I'm not turning around, I feel sick. Like I'm going to throw up." And he continued driving. We didn't see another vehicle until we hit pavement again. It was taller than the pickup by easily a couple feet. I'm 6 feet 1 inch, and my forehead is at the top of the window for reference. It has black surrounding the white of the bones with long arms half stretched to its sides, as if it was saying, "Try and hit me." I watched this thing pass the passenger window and stared up at it as we wailed by it, and it was definitely 3-dimensional, tall with long arms and dark. Dead looking, like light was sucked into it without reflecting anything. Hard to explain. When we hit service again, my friend received a text message from his mother saying, What did you two idiots hit in my brand new truck? I guess the new Ford send near accident reports to the owner when the sensors pick up something? I'm an old school Chevy guy, so I don't know, haha. The only thing I can find online that resembles what we both saw is a Wendigo without the antlers. Or the headlights didn't illuminate them anyway. Third story. I think I had an encounter with a Skinwalker or a Wendigo. I am a 25-year-old man. I live in Utah, and I'm curious if any of you have seen anything like this before. I'm pretty sure I saw a Wendigo or a Skinwalker. I know it sounds strange or crazy. I don't really believe in those things, and I'm regularly skeptical when it comes to the paranormal. This happened to me when I was 17 and in high school and living with my parents. My house at the time was in a very small town. The backyard faced open, empty fields and mountains for miles before you reached another civilization at all. My best friend lived next door and shared this field as our backyard in a way. I have to explain that his house was built on a different street that ended in the field with a small cul-de-sac. I think there was supposed to be more houses built down this street to expand the town, but they clearly never got around to it. So his driveway was basically in this cul-de-sac, even though no other houses were built there. This matters later in the story. I used to stay the night at my friend's house a lot in high school because I didn't have the best relationship with my parents. Every once in a while, we would wake up to hear dragging and a weird gargling sound from the back porch. His room was a basement room with the window well to the back porch. It would happen maybe a couple times a month, but whenever we would gather the courage to check, nothing would be back there. This happened for years. One night haunts my friend and I to this day. My friend was getting ready to move, and we would stay up all night playing games and watching movies. We decided to go on a music drive to just vibe. So we hopped in his truck with high beams and swung out of the driveway, turning them on towards the field to use the roundabout. The light illuminated this thing. It looked like a person, but it wasn't. It was naked on all fours, abnormally large, particularly its limbs that seemed to fold under itself in an unnatural way. Its pale skin clung to it like it had to be stretched onto it. But the part that still sends shivers down my spine is its face. Its jaw hung open to this gaping black maw, like a snake unhinging its jaw to eat. Its black eyes glistened in the light as it looked at us. But just as it turned to see us, it quickly scurried backwards, almost like it was on rewind into the brush of the field. My friend and I were pale as ghosts. We both looked at each other like, "Did you see that too?" We were shaken. Let's just say we tried to have a good rest of the night, but we couldn't believe what we saw. We ended up just sitting there in his basement with guns ready and waiting to hear the gargling and dragging again, but we never did. Sorry that it's not very climactic, but it's the truth. I now don't live in that town anymore. There are times when I visit there, though. That empty field still feels like it's watching and waiting. Even though I can't see it, I can still feel like it's out there. Fourth story. The Wendigo stalks. I wanted to share a story I created with an already existing monster with you guys. I think it's pretty good, but feedback is welcome. Friday, March 13th, 2020. I've been encouraged by my therapist to keep a daily journal as a relief for stress. It's almost like him telling me monsters aren't real for the 500th time wasn't working. Go figure. He said that by writing down what I've been experiencing, I'll somehow subconsciously realize that it's not worth worrying about. I think it's a load of bull, but whatever. Doesn't hurt to try. Every night, I've been having the same dream for about a year now, except it changes one small bit every day. I'm in a cold forest. The darkness is so absolute that it has to be the middle of the night. I'm not exactly sure where in the world I am, but I can hear water nearby. The dream always starts with my waking up in some dry leaves. I look around for a few seconds before standing up. As soon as I take a step, the leaves make a loud, crunching noise. This is followed by a blood-curdling wail from about 100 meters away. At first, that's where the dream ended. But every day, it's been getting a bit longer. About 9 months ago, the first major change occurred. A few seconds after the screech, I instinctively take a step back when I catch a glimpse of two white, shining pinpricks that seem to illuminate the forest immediately in front of them, as well as part of the head of the creature to which these eyes belong. It has a muzzle soaked with a red substance which I can only guess is blood. The second I see the pinpricks, as well as what small portion of the creature they illuminate, I become frozen with fear. What I've learned is that every day the creature gets one step closer before I wake up doused in sweat, too terrified to move a muscle. All of this, at first, wasn't very noticeable. In fact, really, I shouldn't even be scared after all. It's just a dream. Nothing can happen to me. To be honest, I wouldn't be scared if the creature hadn't become so close now. I estimate it's only 1 or 2 steps away. For the last week or so, I've gotten a clear image of it. I'm more terrifying than any word in my vocabulary could accurately describe. Its legs are like that of a deer, yet them along with its entire body and head are colored ash gray. Its body resembles a human, or rather a human corpse. The skin is pressed tight at the bones and its chest cavity is torn open, revealing a disturbing display of internal organs, blood, and gore with intestines dangling down to its middle thigh region. It has long, lanky fur-covered arms that end in claws not unlike a bear's. Yet the most terrifying thing about this abomination is its head. It has a long muzzle, the fur of which is scruffy and sticky with blood. It has long antlers on top and piercing, illuminated, white eyes that light up its surroundings. Last night, it was what I guess is a mere 7 or 8 feet from where I stand. It's getting late now. I need to stop writing and go to bed. I pray with every bit of my soul that I don't find out what happens when the creature reaches me tonight. Fifth story. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate. I was always a solitary kid growing up. I grew up on the outskirts of my little town that I grew up in and never really had any friends. I would hang out with someone here and there, but for the most part one stuck to myself, even in high school. Because of my voluntary solitude, I found time to invest in hobbies like fishing, hunting, and playing cards. I used to always love a game of spades with my parents and little brother. Though I loved all the hobbies I partook in, hunting was by far and away my favorite. I would hunt all sorts of critters when it was in season and spent hours just to hunt something. See, the fun part of it wasn't the fact that I just killed something, it was the fact that I had outsmarted the animal and beaten it. I now had a trophy to signify my victory, and I thirsted for this sense of victory. Nothing even came close to the euphoria supplied to my brain when I came home with a fresh kill under my belt. I would sometimes spend days out in the wilderness to hunt, and I'd get lost out there, out in nature, with nothing but the sounds of the other creatures that inhabited the woods in which I was choosing to steal life away from. Due to my love for hunting and fishing, I never found time to do much schoolwork. I passed all my classes with at least a C and graduated high school, but further education was not something destined for me. I was convinced hunting was my calling. After high school, I began to hunt not just for pleasure, but for work too. There was a company close by to my hometown that made deer jerky and was looking for hunters that could deliver them the meat. Of course, me, the self-proclaimed lover of such activities, applied for this position and after a week of waiting, got the job. I was to begin as of right then and there. So, I grabbed my gear and went out to the woods and set up shop up in the tree stand I had been using for as long as I can remember and began to wait. I must have sat in that stand for hours, because soon the sun was beginning to set. It was summer, though, so I knew I had some time before I was shrouded in darkness. That's when I saw him. A male buck pranced into view all the way on the horizon. I sat there watching it, mesmerized by how it moved. It calmly paced the forest floor, bending over here and there to eat some grass or berries, until finally it came to the creek that I had set my stand up near to. It stood for a moment, looked around, and dropped its head to take a much-needed sip of water. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. I raised my rifle, knowing I had only one shot, and aimed it directly behind his front shoulder. I took a deep breath. Bang! My shot was perfect. It traveled directly through the buck's heart and killed him on the spot. My heart swelled as again I knew I won. All this waiting was not in vain. I nearly flew down the steps to my stand and rushed over to the buck. His eyes were still open. I was glad it was instant so that he wouldn't have to suffer. I picked him up and soon I was back home. I called the company and soon they had someone come over to my house and pick up my latest kill. I thanked the man as he left and shut my door, feeling prouder than ever. I knew that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. A few years passed, and I continued doing what I loved, and eventually I received enough money from hunting that I moved away from my hometown and moved to West Virginia, as I heard that the hunting there was great. I wanted to live out in the backcountry, as I wanted to be able to hunt all the time, and I found a place where I could do just that. There was an old cabin, not too expensive, that sat right in the woods. Not too far away from a town, maybe a 15 or 20-minute drive, so not completely isolated, but the town it's close to is not exactly bustling, so it's not urban either. I liked it very much and made a couple of friends in town. Most like hunting, but only one ever wanted to come with me to hunt. His name is Brian. Brian's a good guy and a young one too. He's just about my age, give or take a few years older, but we get along well, and we've gone hunting multiple times. The only difference between us is that he's got a full family. Wife, kids, the works, even has a golden retriever. He's a lucky guy, I'll tell you what. Good shot, too. Glad he's my partner. I had set up my tree stand maybe a week after buying the cabin out in the woods, and maybe a month after that is when Brian and I first went hunting together. We sat up in that stand for hours, waiting for something to turn up. Eventually a doe showed up, and we did our thing and carried her back to my cabin. At this point, I had learned enough about the making of jerky to know how to do it myself, and with the help of Brian, we skinned the doe and began making jerky and venison steaks. That was a good night. We would go hunting maybe once or twice every 2 weeks, but I would go hunting almost every night. At this point, I had found another company somewhat close by, maybe an hour away, that again needed hunters to gather meat and send it in to them. So once again I applied and got the job. Everything seemed to be going well. I was good at my job and it paid well. Because I was up in that tree stand for so long, almost every night, I knew just about every sound in the woods, from the elk yells to mountain lion screams to foxes and coyotes. You give me a noise out in those woods, I could tell you exactly what animal it was and sometimes which gender it was. That's what made this certain night so different. Like usual, I was up in my stand and I heard a scream. I played it off like it was nothing because it probably was nothing, except this scream was different. It sounded similar to something I've heard before, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Brian was with me, and he couldn't figure it out either. Usually we don't really care about these noises, as it's not exactly our business to worry about every little sound we hear in the woods at night. However, this noise was just wrong. Something was not right with this scream, and after a good 10 minutes of sitting through it and thinking through every animal it could be, Brian and I decided that we would go check it out. After all, we were armed and both good shots, and if it was a mountain lion, we figured it would run away if it heard us coming. We got down from the stand and began our walk towards the direction of the scream. After a minute or two, we could tell we were getting closer because the noise was getting louder. It seemed almost echoing through the trees, and I won't lie when I say it freaked us both out a little. However, we trudged onward, and eventually, after another minute of hiking, we stumbled upon a clearing, where we saw what the noise was emanating from. It was a huge elk standing in the middle of the clearing, just screaming out into the night. We looked at each other, and through the relieved look on Brian's face, I could tell he still shared the same uneasiness that I was feeling. We turned to look at the huge elk, still wailing, and deciding to let it be, walked all the way back to the stand. After some back and forth, we decided it would be in our best interest to call it a night and just go home. When we hunted at night, Brian usually stayed in the guest room in my cabin, as it was usually late when we got done, 2 or 3 in the morning, and he didn't want to wake his children or wife up coming home. So he crashed at my place. However, even though we were far away now from the elk, it seemed as though it had followed us and was just as loud as ever. This freaked us both out a little bit, but we figured if we went to sleep it would all be over in the morning. So we did, but it wasn't the ending. When we woke up, the scream had disappeared. We were relieved, and Brian said his goodbye and left for his home. I did my normal routine, went into town, and waited until dusk before going back out into the woods and into my stand. I was still a tad big unnerved from last night, but I figured this would help me get my mind off of it. And it did, until around midnight when I heard a scream again. This time, however, the scream really sounded wrong. Like really wrong. I could tell this was not the same scream from last night, but it again was not an animal I could put my finger on. I hoped and prayed it would go away, but it didn't. The screaming persisted and persisted until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to find out what the hell was screaming in the dead of night. I set out in the same direction as last night, expecting for the worst to be awaiting me. I trudged and trudged through the underbrush, until finally I reached the clearing from the night prior, where the scream had reached its peak. What I saw, however, shook me to my core. There was no elk this time like I had expected. No, there was a figure standing in the middle of the clearing, facing away from me. I froze, unable to comprehend what I was witnessing. This thing was massive, at least 8 feet tall, and I couldn't tell if it was human or something else. I'll admit it, I was terrified. I had never seen something like this before, and I was ready to book it away from there. I didn't want whatever this thing was to see me, though, so I backpedaled as slow as I could, staring at this thing for as long as it was in view. As soon as it was just on the horizon, it stopped screaming. Again, I froze. Why'd it stop? I wondered. I stood there, in the trees, dumbfounded, staring at this 8-foot-tall creature that had just been wailing in the middle of the woods. I realized now what a fatal mistake I had made by not running home as soon as I saw this thing. As I stood there, this thing turned around, and my body was struck with fear. Though I was at least 300 yards away from this thing, it stared directly at me, and I knew it knew I was there. Its yellow eyes pierced daggers into my heart as it got down on all fours and began wailing once more, starting to gallop towards me. I stood there frozen for another moment before booking it. I knew all the shortcuts to my house, and I took them all, knowing I may not have much time left. I sprinted faster than I have ever sprinted, hearing its echoing cries in the distance, its growing intensity only proving I was going too slow. As the sound grew louder than ever, I saw my house. I fumbled with my keys to get to the one that opened my front door, and as I reached the porch, I found it. I unlocked the door and shut it as soon as I reached it. The cries were right outside, and I knew whatever this thing was, it was on my porch, searching for a way to get inside. Terrified, I hid in my freezer, where I hoped the smell of meat and ice would help mask my scent to the being. This is where I've been hiding for the last 2 hours. The creature has now found its way inside my house, and I can hear it moving around upstairs, tracking any signs of me. I am in the basement and in the cooler, so hopefully it won't find me in here. I tried texting Brian to get over to my place, but my messages haven't been going through, and given it's 3 in the morning, I doubt he'd see them anyways. I have no idea if this thing will go away in the morning, but right now it's my only hope that I have. If it doesn't, then it will find me eventually, and who knows what it will do then. If you're seeing this, please, I'm begging you, please heed my advice. If you hear screaming in the middle of the woods at night, do not investigate. 6th story. I will never walk through the woods at night again. For starters, as you all know, it was New Year's Eve, and most people like to have their fair share of drinks at that time. My friend hosted a party that was 2 kilometers, 25 miles away from my house, if I take the road, which is in pitch black, for about 5 km of the total distance. However, I can also take the other road, which would have totaled in about 7 kilometers around a lake. Google Harka Lake, Estonia, and it should show up, which goes through the city I live near. The road through there is well lit all the way. As you would imagine, I won't be taking a triple distance at night when I'm a bit tipsy. So I split from the party at about 3:10 a.m. and decide to take the short walk through the woods. I was walking through the forest with the only light source being my phone's flashlight and the dots of the city street lights glimmering far over the lake. At one point, when starting the hike, I opened the camera app on my phone to snap a few photos for fun, uploading them to the Facebook chat between me and a friend, describing my little journey. He was making sure I get home safe. About halfway down the road, farthest point from the houses and lit places around, I hear rustling about maybe 20 to 40 meters away from me. I stop walking to listen. I hear some things, coming towards me at a slow pace with the snow crunching under their heavy steps and branches crackling. I call out, "Hey," through the night. The steps stopped. Nothing but dead silence for what seemed like forever. I thought I just might be hearing things, taking into account I did have a few beers and 2 or 3 shots of vodka. I take another picture from my phone, uploading it to the Facebook chat. As the flash of the camera lights up a small part of the trees for a split second, and I feel my feet sink into the ground as panic freezes my entire body. I was not alone, and there was something between the trees now 20 to 30 meters away staring back at me. Suddenly the steps start again. I snap out of my fear and book it, hearing the steps behind me grow faster and finally fading behind, running down the road as fast as I have ever ran, not looking back. As I finally see the street lights like the light at the end of the tunnel, I finally reach the lit part of the road. I turn around to look back. Knew nothing. A few cars drive by, as I walk the final few hundred meters being as alert as I have ever been. I reach my house. I open my front door and lock it. I feel relieved and safe. I walk to my toilet and take the meanest dump ever had, partially from the consumed alcohol and partially from the fear. I scroll through the photos on my phone that I took when something catches my eye. 2 pairs of eyes looking at me. Cold fear overcomes my body again. Those were probably just some deer or wild boars stumbling around. But that is not what scares me. The feeling of being alone, intoxicated and unaware in the dark at your most vulnerable. You know nothing about what stares back at you from the dark, having vision for only 10 feet around you. 2 pairs of eyes staring back at you from the abyss of the night. 7th story. My wife and I found a door in the middle of the woods. What the hell? What is it, honey? My wife's voice called out from behind me. It's a door. She laughed. Did you break into the pot stash early? We're in the middle of the woods. Why would there be Karen stopped as she saw it, and we stood shoulder to shoulder looking at it. An old wooden door built into the side of a hill in the middle of nowhere. It really is crazy what you can find out on these expeditions sometimes. Huh, honey? She grinned. Should we knock? I shook my head. I'm not really sure I want to meet the kind of person that lives inside a hill. Oh, come on. Karen punched my shoulder. Where's your sense of adventure? Karen strode up to the door and gave it a polite knock. Hello, I'm looking for a Mr. Beard and Mr. Treebeard. I chuckled as I shook my head. Karen never let me forget the little wonderful things about her that made me fall in love with her. She turned to me in mock disappointment. I don't think anybody's home, honey, she said. All right, come on, I said. We've got enough shrooms for now. Let's find a good place to trip. Are you kidding? God, I married the most boring man in the universe. We got to go inside. What if someone lives there? What if somebody lives in a hill in the woods? I think the man who built his house underground in a forest will be understanding if we offer to share some of our pot with him. You assume that just because he lives in a hill he smokes pot? I don't know, Karen, that's pretty racist. Racist? Against who? Tree people, obviously. Who else? Karen laughed and punched me in the shoulder again. I feigned being hurt, even though I loved it when she did that. All right, I finally agreed. After all, if I didn't completely ignore common sense sometimes, I wouldn't be married to you in the first place. You're really funny. After I kick you out of the house, maybe you can live with Mr. Tree Beard out here in the woods. I chuckled and tried the knob. The door was unlocked. As we pushed it open, we were greeted by a damp, mossy smell. The room inside was pitch black, but it seemed to be made entirely of rock, not dirt like I had expected. Hold on a second, I said, sliding the pack off onto the ground and fumbling around inside for the flashlight. I flipped it on and scanned the walls. What the? The walls were all covered in some sort of nonsensical carvings. It reminded me of when we'd studied Egyptian hieroglyphics in school. What is this, wingdings? Karen joked. I didn't answer. I had gotten the sudden feeling that I was being watched. I swung the flashlight to the back wall, only to discover that there wasn't one. The passage continued on and sloped downwards until the flashlight beam ended on the ceiling about 30 feet away. Karen, I think we should dash. Hold on, what's that? Karen pointed to a dark spot on the floor, and I pointed the flashlight down to illuminate it. It was some kind of black liquid. Motor oil? I joked. But Karen's wasn't joking around. She knelt down to look at the puddle. It's blood, Danny, she said. And look, it's leading down inside. I tilted the flashlight up. She was right. There was a blood trail leading deeper into the cavern. It's probably just an animal, I said. We should go. But Karen was already tying her hair up the way she did at work. She cupped her hands to her mouth. Hello, she called out. I heard the call echo down the chamber, which must have been much larger than we had originally thought. Is anybody down there? Silence. But then a barely audible call answered. H, help. The call sounded like it was coming from deep within the cavern. When I heard it, all the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and there was a sinking feeling in my chest. My every instinct started telling me to get the fuck out of this place. Karen, it could be some sort of trap, I said. Let's call the park rangers and then get the fuck out of here. Somebody's hurt down there, Danny, she said sternly. But then her expression softened a bit. Sorry, honey, this is what you got yourself into when you decided to marry a nurse. I sighed. I knew there was no stopping Karen once she had set her mind to do something, but I kept a tight grip on the heavy mag flashlight as we proceeded down the passageway. The blood trail got thinner as we walked deeper into the cavern. Whoever it was must have lost most of their blood in the antechamber. But if they were hurt out there, why had they retreated further into the cavern? Why not go outside where they had a chance of being found? It didn't make any sense. The air grew hotter and more humid as we went further down the increasingly steep slope, and a pungent smell of mold invaded our nostrils. I coughed as I breathed the horrid air. Where did all this dust come from? The deeper sections of the cavern walls had been cracked open by tree roots that had burrowed their way through the stone. What the fuck is this place? I whispered to Karen. Maybe some sort of makeshift survival bunker? She guessed. She cupped her hands to her mouth again. Hello, oh. Her shout echoed down the hallway. If you can hear us, stay calm. We're going to help you get out to safety. Help. The voice was a little louder this time. We must be getting closer, I thought. But the sense of revulsion I felt on hearing the voice only got worse. Did she not feel it? As we went deeper inside, we found where the blood trail ended. There was a long smear of it on the ground. It looked like somebody had been dragged across the floor while bleeding heavily. And then it just stopped. Not even a drop after that. The walls of the cavern had now been almost completely overrun by roots, and breathing was getting difficult as the air had grown hotter and more choked with dust. Help! The voice was very close now, and I could now make it out more clearly. It sounded strange, all breathy and raspy, like a crude imitation of what a person should sound like. The floor had now become so steep it was impossible to go any further without risking a fall into God knows what. We got to get down to him somehow. Karen wheezed out. She must have been having even more trouble breathing in the hot, thick dust than me. I've got it, I said. You step back. I pulled out the length of rope we'd brought in our emergency gear and tied it to one of the thick roots springing through the walls of the cave. I gave it a few firm tugs to make sure it was secure before tying the other end around my waist. I never wanted to turn around and go home so badly, but I knew there was no way Karen would leave without seeing this through. I started the climb down carefully, leaning over and moving the flashlight around to try to see what was going on without slipping and falling. I could see the vague outline of a man in the darkness, and I swung the flashlight beam over him. My blood went cold. Karen? What? Run! My breath was knocked out as the rope yanked back against my waist. I hoped it was Karen pulling, but I knew it wasn't. She wasn't that strong. I landed on the ground hard, and the rope continued to pull me backwards. Danny, what the fuck is Dash? Run, goddammit. She started to back away as the roots on the walls all started to move, slowly snaking their way towards us. I sawed through the rope with my pocket knife and stumbled forward into a sprint, yanking Karen along with me. She wouldn't have hesitated if she'd seen what I had. At the bottom of the cavern, a man had been suspended above the ground in a giant web of roots that were writhing and sliding through him. Little bulges were moving slowly up the roots that led away from his collapsed and shriveled body, one root jutting into his throat and twisting around every time he called for help. The plant was working his voice box like a puppet. We abandoned our flashlight and gear bag in the cave behind us as we sprinted towards the exit in total darkness, hacking and coughing as the moldy, dusty air of the cavern filled our lungs. I could feel myself tripping on roots that had not been there on the way in. I felt a yank on my hand as Karen fell, and we both tumbled down onto the writhing roots which circled around our limbs and began to drag us backwards. I started hacking desperately at them with my pocket knife. The roots recoiled as I struck them, and I managed to free my legs. I pulled at Karen's hands, but the roots were stronger. Just leave me, she shouted at me. Fuck no. I swung blindly at her legs, and the knife connected with a sick thud. I swung a dozen more times, slashing her legs once by mistake before she was loose enough to yank free. We kept running towards the door, and I could feel the air getting cooler and fresher, and the floor beginning to level out. We'd almost made it. I could see the outline of light around the door now. We ran full force into it, ricocheting off and bouncing back onto the ground. I scrambled up. Please be open. I grabbed the knob and yanked, and a torrent of fresh air and sunlight poured into the cavern. I grabbed Karen's arm and half dragged her through open door before collapsing exhausted on the ground. We made it, I gasped out. My chest was heaving up and down as I lay on my back, coughing up all the dust from the cavern air. Yeah, Karen was bright red with exhaustion, her arms and legs covered in scratch marks. I don't imagine I looked much better. What was that? I said breathlessly, getting to my feet. Karen shook her head. I don't know, but let's get thee out of here. I helped Karen to her feet, and we both stood there panting and coughing with our hands on our knees. Karen coughed something up into her hand. Danny, she said, showing it to me. It was a small leaf. I watched her face as little green tendrils began to spread out and coil around under her skin, and I realized with horror that it hadn't been dust we were breathing in. It had been spores. 8th story. I think I had a Wendigo outside my bedroom window. Okay, so this is how it went. I was sitting in my room playing video games at like 1 a.m., and then someone started to call my name from outside my window, and it sounded just like my grandma's voice. I was 16 and living with my grandparents at my great-grandparents' home. Got our house sold out from under us, so we had to move into my great-grandma's home. And it was trying to persuade me into coming outside, and I knew it wasn't my grandma, since it was talking differently than how my grandma would have. Tried to persuade me. It said something like this: hey, name here, come outside, I have something to show you. Just come here, please. But when I didn't respond, it started to tap violently on my window, saying, why won't you come outside? But after a while of not responding, it went away. Also note that there is a forest in our backyard with a railroad, and it was also in the middle of winter, and I didn't know what it was until I heard about the Wendigo after I searched up a bit. I'm sorry if I typed incorrectly or anything. I'm not that great at grammar when typing or writing. Also, this is a real story, because now I'm actually traumatized by that experience, and I'll never go near a forest in the middle of winter for the rest of my life. Also, ATM, my house is being sold again a year later, and we are moving back to my great-grandparents' house again, but thank God it's summer. But also there are more paranormal experiences that I've had in that house, but those are stories for another time. I just wanted to share my experience with the world. Please don't bring hate to this post, because I'm being honest, and I really just don't want negativity here, but memes are welcome. Smiley face. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comment section. And like the video, as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.